3. Transcendence. As the staff of Thunderhill filled the cavern, milling around the ship that most had never seen before, Ginger and Dom and the other witnesses followed Miles Bennell into the vessel. The interior was not dramatic, but as plain as the exterior, with none of the complex and powerful machinery that one expected in a craft capable of such a journey. Miles Bennell explained that the builders had advanced beyond machinery as humankind understood it, perhaps even beyond physics as humankind understood it. There was one long chamber within, and it was for the most part gray, drab, featureless. The warm golden luminosity which had filled the vessel on the night of July 6, and which Brendan had remembered in his dreams, was not visible now. There was only a line of ordinary work lights that the scientists had strung for their convenience. In spite of its plainness, the chamber had a warmth, appeal, and magic that, strangely enough, reminded Ginger of her father's private office at the back of his first jewelry store in Brooklyn, the one he always used as his headquarters. The walls of that sanctum sanctorum had been decorated only with a calendar, and the furniture had been inexpensive, old, and well-used, plain, even drab. But for Ginger it had been a fine and magical room, because Jacob had seldom worked there, but had squirreled away with one book or another, from which he'd often read to her. Sometimes it would be a mystery or a fantasy about gnomes and witches, a story of other worlds, or a thriller about spies. And when Jacob read, his voice acquired a resonant and mesmerizing timbre. The reality of the gray little office faded, and for hours Ginger could believe herself to be investigating with Sherlock Holmes upon the misty moors, celebrating with the hobbit Mr. Bilbo Baggins inside the hill at Bag End, or with Jim and Will as they explored the terrible carnival in Mr. Bradbury's lovely book. Jacob's office hadn't been only what it seemed to be, and although this ship bore no physical resemblance to Jacob's office, it was similar in that it was more than it appeared. Under its drab skin it harbored wondrous things, great mysteries. Spaced along each long wall were 4 coffin-like containers of a semi-transparent milky blue substance that looked like carved quartz. These were, Miles Bennell explained, the beds in which the travelers had passed their long journey in a state of near-suspended animation, aging only the equivalent of 1 Earth year for every 50 that passed. As they dreamed, the fully automated ship proceeded through the void, reaching ahead with an array of sensors and probes for indications of life in the hundreds of thousands of solar systems that it passed. It did not escape Ginger's notice that the top of each container was marked by 2 raised rings, precisely the size of those that had appeared in Dom's and Brendan's hands. "You told us they were dead when they got here," Ned reminded Bennell, "but you never answered my question. What did they die from?" "Time," Bennell said. Although the ship and all its devices continued to function well right through the descent and the landing there along I-80, the occupants had perished of old age long before they ever got here. "Face it, but you've told us they aged 1 year for every 50 that passed." "Yes," Bennell said, "and from what we've learned about them, they're long-lived by our standards. 500 years seems to be their average lifespan." Standing with Marcy in his arms, Jack Twist said, "But, my God, at 1 year for 50, they'd have to have been traveling 25,000 years to have died of old age." "Longer," Bennell said. "In spite of their vast knowledge and technology, they never found a way to exceed the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. In fact, their ship cruises at 98% of that, something like 182,000 miles per second. Fast, yes, but not fast enough when you consider the distances involved. Our own galaxy, in which they're our neighbors, has a diameter of 80,000 light years, or about 240,000 trillion miles. They tried to pinpoint the location of their homeworld for us through tridimensional galactic diagrams. We believe they come from a place more than 31,000 light years around the perimeter of the galaxy from us. And since they travel at just under the speed of light, that means they left home a little less than 32,000 years ago. Even with their lives extended by suspended animation, they must have perished nearly 10,000 years ago. Ginger found herself shaking again, as she had shaken upon first turning her gaze upon the ancient ship. She touched the nearest of the milky blue containers, which seemed to her to be a powerful testimony to compassion and empathy beyond human understanding. The embodiment of a sacrifice that staggered the mind and humbled the heart. To have willingly given up the comforts of home, to have left their world and all their kind, to travel such distances on the mere hope of being able to help a struggling species at the far, far end. Benel's voice had grown lower as he spoke, and now it was as soft as if he had been speaking in a church. They died 25,000 light years from home. They were already dead when humankind still lived in caves and was just beginning to learn the basics of agriculture. When these incredible journeyers died, the entire population of our world was only about 5 million, fewer people than now live in New York alone. During the past 10,000 years, while we struggled out of the dirt and broke in our backs to build a shaky civilization, always teetering on the edge of destruction, these 8 dead seekers were coming steadily toward us across the vastness of the galactic rim. Ginger saw Brendan touch the other corner of the coffin on which she'd rested her own hands. Tears glistened in his eyes. She knew what he was thinking. As a priest, he had taken vows of poverty and celibacy, and had forsworn many of the pleasures of secular life as an offering to God. He knew the meaning of sacrifice, but none of his sacrifices compared to what these beings had given up in the name of their cause. Parker said, but to have found 5 other intelligent species when the distances are so great and the odds so small, they must send out a great many of these ships. We think they dispatch hundreds a year, maybe even thousands, and had been doing so for longer than 100,000 years before this vessel left port. As I said, it's their religion and their racial purpose combined. All the other 5 species they discovered were within 15,000 light years from their world. And remember, even when they locate an intelligence at that distance, they don't know of it until 15,000 years after the discovery, for it takes that long for the message of the contact to reach home again. Are you beginning to grasp the depth and scale of their commitment? Most ships, Ernie said, must go out and never come back and never meet with any success. Most of them just cruise on into endless space while the crew perishes, as this crew perished. Yes, Benel said. And yet they keep going, Dom said. And yet they keep going, Benel said. We may never meet others of them face to face, Ned said. Give humanity 100 years to learn to apply all the knowledge and technology they brought us, Benel said. Then give us another, at least 1,000 years more to mature to the point where we're capable of making that same commitment. Then a ship will be launched, manned by a human crew in suspended animation, and possibly we'll find a way to improve the process so that they don't age at all or age far more slowly. None of us will be alive to watch it take off, but it will go. I know in my heart it will. Then, 32,000 years after that, our distant descendants will be there, returning the call, remaking the contact these creatures don't even know they've established. They stood in stunned silence, trying to grasp the immensity of what Benel envisioned. Ginger felt a chill of the most delicious and indescribable nature. Brandon said, it's God's scale we're talking about, thinking, planning, and doing on God's scale rather than mankind's. Parker said, Sorta makes it a whole lot less important who's going to win this year's World Series, doesn't it? Don put his hands upon the rings that were featured on the top of that particular suspended animation chamber around which everyone was gathered. He said, "I believe only 6 of the crew were dead, fully dead, that night in July, Dr. Benno. I'm beginning to recall what happened when we entered the ship, and I feel as if we were called to 2 of these containers by something that still lived within them. Barely lived, but was not yet entirely dead." "Yes," Brendan said, tears weaving down his cheeks now. "In fact, I remember the golden light was coming from 2 of these boxes, and that it exerted not only an obvious but subliminal attraction. I was compelled to come and put my hands upon the rings, and when I put them here, somehow I knew that beneath the lid something was desperately clinging to life, not for its own sake, but for the sake of passing on some gift. And by putting its own hands against the inner surface of those conductive rings, it gave me what it had come so far to give. Then it died at last. I didn't know what was in me then, exactly. I suppose it would have taken some time to understand, to learn how to use the power, but before I ever had a chance, we were taken into custody." "Alive," Benno said, shocked, fascinated. "Well, the condition of the 8 bodies, 2 were virtually turned to dust. 2 more were badly decomposed, apparently because their suspended animation boxes had shut down once they died. 4 were in much better condition, and 2 seemed perfectly preserved, but we never dared imagine." "Yes," Dom said, clearly recalling more, "just barely alive, but holding on to pass the gift. Of course I expected to be interrogated, to have a chance to tell what had happened to me in the ship, but the government was so eager to protect society from the shock of contact, and then so afraid of the unknown, I never had the chance to tell." "Soon," Benno said, "we can tell the world." "And change the world," Brendan said. Ginger looked at the faces of the Tranquility family, at Parker and Benno, and sensed the bond that would soon exist between all men and women, an incredible closeness that would arise from their sudden shared leap up the evolutionary ladder toward a better world. No more would people be strangers one to another, not anywhere on earth. All prior human history had been lived in the dark, and now they stood at the gates of a new dawn. She looked at her 2 small hands, the surgeon's hands, and she thought of the decade-long studies to which she had diligently applied herself with the hope of saving lives. Now perhaps all that training would be for nothing. She didn't care. She was filled with joy at the prospect of a world that did not need medicine or surgery. Soon, when Dom had passed the gift to her, as she would ask him to, she'd be able to heal with her touch. More important, with only her touch, she would be able to pass unto others the power to heal themselves. The human lifespan would increase dramatically overnight, 300, 400, even 500 years. Except for accidents, the specter of death would be banished to a distant horizon. No more would the Annas and Jacobs be wrenched away from the children who loved them. No more would husbands have to sit in mourning at the deathbeds of young wives. No more, Baruch Hashem, no more.